Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game pod from the Wolves Game 4 win, forcing a Game 5 in the Western Conference Finals against the Dallas Mavs. We're going to talk all about what happened in this one, from improved defense from Minnesota, forcing Luka and Kyrie into difficult offensive nights. But the bigger thing was just more consistency offensively, mainly from the Wolves stars. Karl-Anthony and Anthony Edwards both showing up on offense. We'll break the whole game down here on the show today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day. And it's a victory Wednesday. First Wolves win in a minute. Timberwolves beat the Mavs on Tuesday night, forcing a Game 5 back at Target Center on Thursday, and avoiding the first 4-game losing streak of the season, which of course would have ended the season for the Wolves. So a massive win Tuesday night, obviously, and lots to get to today. I thought the Wolves played still not much better than they did over the first 3 games, but they did enough in certain areas to kind of get them over the hump. And I think defensively, the intensity at least picked up. So we'll get into that a little bit. A couple things the Wolves did differently defensively that I thought were key in this game. And then offensively, we saw the Stars perform in a way that we hadn't seen them perform over the first 3 games of the series. So lots to get to here today on the show. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. More great local sports coverage 24/7 for free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today. Again, Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And a reminder, you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. All right. Lot to get to here today. I think that the big picture, and this is what I've been doing here the last couple of games on the post-game pod, is kind of like this game in the context of the series as a whole. And this has been such a weird series, both these last 2 series. I mean, like the Phoenix series obviously was just like a kind of a classic sweep. The Denver series, of course, was 7 games that were like impossibly entertaining, yet still not really close. Like there were only a couple games that were even semi-close. Like 4 or 5 of them were basically just straight blowouts. But yet it went 7 games. Now, this series is almost kind of the reverse of that, where Dallas almost swept the series, but every single game has been close. Every single game has seen a lead change in the last 4 or 5 minutes. I know the last game, the margin of victory was 7, and this game was 5, but they were basically 1-possession games, or they were in the final minute, really. So 5, or I guess to this point, 4 really close games, and yet Dallas still had a real shot to sweep the series. And I still don't think Minnesota's played well in this series. And actually, at times, Dallas hasn't looked great either. It's just been, but it's been fun, right? They're close, they're fun, they're close games, they're fun games. But you look at like the game 1, Minnesota had this massive advantage outside the arc, and they ended up losing the game. Statistically really hard to lose a game when you win the 3-point line by that much. And there's other stats like that over games 2 and 3 where you'd believe that the Wolves would have a shot to win, but they've messed up in so many other areas, whether that was some of the turnovers last game or in this game, it's foul trouble, the free throw disparity last game, the interior defense that's been non-existent, just the really poor 3-point shooting from basically all the role players, all of the above are things that haven't gone the Wolves' way. And they didn't actually play that well for long stretches in this game either, but they ended up winning by 5. Like they played better in game 1. They played better for certainly stretches in game 2. Game 3 was a bit different. But yet this is the game they end up winning. And you still don't, it does not feel like they've clicked at all. And if somehow the Wolves could suddenly play like how they did for obviously the Phoenix series or long stretches, full games in that Denver series, they should win. Like they were a better team than Dallas in the regular season for a reason. And I know Dallas is different post deadline. The way I summarized this the other day on the show is the Mavs are the best player in the series. They have Luka. The Wolves have, like you would argue, and actually NBA and TNT guys were on Inside the NBA, I should say, were, I've given some thoughts on that previously. I try not to wade into those waters too much, but they were just debating, if all 4 stars, as they were phrasing it, leaving Rudy off the star conversation, but Kat and Ant on the Wolves side and Kyrie and Luka on the Mavs side, if those guys all played their best possible games, who has the advantage? And both Charles and Kenny said the Wolves, and nobody else answered the question. And it's clear. The Wolves role players, even their secondary quote unquote stars, if you will, are better players. But the question is, what's the gap between Luka and Ant? And what's the potential gap between Kyrie and Kat? And in this particular game, Kat was better than Kyrie, except for the foul trouble, and Ant was better than Luka. And we'll get obviously more in depth on that. I want to talk. There's a lot of Kat thoughts I have here. I mean, I say Ant was better than Luka. You could make the argument for Luka being better, but Ant was better down the stretch, and that's when it mattered the most. And so I think in totality, I would argue Ant had the better game. But anyway, that was kind of like, it's super oversimplifying it, and I get that. But then like you look at the role players too, and actually you would think the Wolves won by more than 5 if you consider what I just said about the stars. But like Kyle Anderson was probably the next best overall player on the floor. I know he only scored 2 points. He was really good. Conley had some really big moments in this game. And I know Gafford was great. Gafford had a couple of crazy blocks in the paint, and Derek Jones Jr. hit a couple of big shots, but Jaden Hardy, I guess, had some nice plays too. So I guess the role players were close to a wash in this game. But Kyle Anderson, we'll talk a lot more about slow-mo later. He had a massive impact on this game for Minnesota. A couple of quick things I want to point out here off the top before we get a little bit more in the weeds on some stuff. I've said this on the podcast. I've said this on Twitter, on X. The story of the series is not how Minnesota is defending Luka. If you listen to Reggie Miller and Stan Van Gundy on the TNT broadcast, you'd think that like the Wolves are committing basketball malpractice with the way they're playing defense. But I remind you, these are all games that have been won and lost in the final 3 or 4 minutes of the game. And so obviously there's a reason they're close. And the Wolves are like, how do you defend Luka? Show me somebody that has consistently defended him well. And has put together the blueprint, the optimal way to guard Luka Doncic, plus, an otherwise healthy Dallas team with Kyrie. I know Derek Lively didn't play, but, in this series, at least with Kyrie on the floor and all this stuff, there isn't a one size fits all, like, hey, do this every time and it's going to work. The Wolves have switched up coverages, and I think that's been great. This game, for the first time, they had Anthony Edwards as the primary defender for Luka. And I thought that worked. I thought it actually wore down Luka a little, and yet the Wolves were still able, because they were switching some stuff and they were loading up a little bit more on Luka, and didn't get worn down in the same way as when he's chasing around Kyrie. And I said this the other day on the show. Actually, I think I said it before game 3, that I wanted to see the Wolves try putting Ant on Luka, because I thought that, or I said it before game 2, I guess it would have been on Friday. For that very reason, I think Ant can take the wear and tear of a bigger body, banging up against him during the game and taking that challenge better than chasing around, a water bug like a Kyrie. And that proved to be true here. Also, anytime that Luka had the ball, like basically below the free throw line, which isn't often because usually he's initiating, but if he's posting up or facing up below the free throw line, the Wolves were loading up on that side of the floor in the same way that we see teams do against Ant, or, basically like the extreme way that both Phoenix and Denver did it in the first couple rounds of the playoffs. And that's a winning proposition against a team with role players that are struggling from outside the arc like Dallas. There's one possession in particular they did this in, I think it was the third quarter, and the ball got swung. They rotated well to Kyrie, and by the time it, I can't remember. I think it was Derek Jones Jr. It might have been PJ Washington above the break, like a rushed above the break 3 that they just missed, and it was a semi-contested look. Like, if you could load up on Luka and force the ball out of his hands by playing this, like, Ant's guarding him, but then you've got 2 other guys kind of bracketing behind, so you're essentially like 1 and 2 half guys on the ball. Force the Wolves defense, if they're playing crisply and playing well, like they were in this game and they did for much of the Denver series and all of the Phoenix series, if they're rotating that quickly and contesting shots on the perimeter, you'd much rather have a semi-contested Derek Jones Jr., PJ Washington, injured Maxi Kleber shot, whoever it is. You'd rather have that be the attempt than a Luka anything one-on-one. That's just kind of where we're at. And so I thought the Wolves loading up on him worked really well in this game, as there weren't a ton of opportunities for it. But if Luka has the ball below the free throw line, they absolutely have to do that. Or even really, frankly, pretty much at the wing or lower, anywhere except for at the top of the circle, I think loading the strong side is the right move. And I know that the Luka cross-court pass is great, and he burned them a couple of times, slinging it past the opposite corner. But that's where that rotation to the corner has to be quicker. But if he's going to straight just rotate it around the perimeter, the Wolves can recover quick enough to at least make those semi-contested looks for Dallas. I want to talk about Slow-Mo next. I want to talk about how he defended Luka and also him offensively. And then some overall kind of observations, a couple other things I thought the Wolves did great. And then we'll close the show with individual studs and duds. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at Game Time. Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. It's not just NBA tickets either. It's really anything. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for anything. Sports, concerts, comedy, theater. My wife and I like to go to all of the above, any sporting event, almost any theater production. I love concerts. I love comedy shows. And if you're going to procrastinate, which I too often do, Game Time is the best way to get those tickets. They also have flash deals. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets or tickets to anything else with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? If so, no doubt you're like me. You turned down the volume because of all the shouting. Instead, make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right. Let's talk slow-mo. Kyle Anderson was great in this game. And if you just looked at the box score and didn't watch the game, you never would have guessed it. If you just watched the Denver series or even parts of the Phoenix series, you never would have guessed it. Kyle Anderson was awesome in this game. First of all, defensively, we saw this a little bit in game 3 and in flashes in games 1 and 2. When he guarded Luka Doncic, he has been the most impactful one-on-one defender against Luka Doncic of anybody that we've seen on the floor for Minnesota in the series. Far better than Jaden's been, better than the possessions Dike Alexander Walker's gotten against him, and more of a sample than what we've seen Ant do against him. But obviously, you'd prefer Slow-Mo to do it and save some bullets for Ant for later, or literally offensive. Not literally. That's not what literally means. Offensive bullets, we'll call it that. Save some juice for Ant on offense later in the game. So Ant guarded him a little bit more in the first half, and Slow-Mo, as the game wore on, it seemed like, I haven't done a full rewatch yet, but it seemed like Slow-Mo got more possessions against him as the game wore on. And it did great. It's the combination, again, the size and the physicality, the length, and the basketball IQ know-how, knowing what Luka's trying to do. There were a couple of times where Luka got either Ant or Slow-Mo on his hip, and oftentimes Luka shoots that little leaner from, 10 feet or, so like just inside the free throw line. And in this game, he almost looked to pass that off more than shoot it. There were 2 or 3 of those possessions, and Ant had a couple of those too, but it was weird where those are shots we're used to Luka taking, and instead he passed out of it. Now, he had 10 assists, only 3 turnovers. He also only shot 7 of 21 for the field in this game. Luka, by the way, was 3 of 10 on 2-point attempts. The Wolves did a good job of contesting all of those shots, or at least presenting as though they were going to contest it, which actually, I don't want to move off from Slow-Mo too quickly, and I guess we'll get back to him a little bit later. But a side note here on Rudy. Not Rudy's best game, but a really good Rudy game. And it's not going to get talked about. Certainly wasn't talked about on Inside the NBA and TNT after the game. But Rudy's defense toward the end of the game and his overall deterrence for Luka and Kyrie was massive in this game. I thought he was a half step higher. Again, need to rewatch all this. This is right after the game I'm recording this. I thought he was a half step higher when he was in drop. And also I thought that corralling ball handlers was just a little bit more aggressive in this game. It wasn't like a true full drop. And that was an adjustment I said after game one. If the Wolves keep doing what they're doing, but mix some other coverages in, do a bit more blitzing and trapping, especially on the sides of the floor, in the middle of the floor, if you want to play drop, fine, but not a true drop. A little bit of a more aggressive drop, if you will, a half step higher, making both Luka and Kyrie, whoever's got the ball in their hands, at least pause and think. Pause before they're making that decision. Make them think about it. And it's like you lead to Kyrie and Luka combining for 13 of 33 from the field. Or 13 of 33, is that right? 13 of 39 from the field. 13 of 39 from the field for Luka and Kyrie combined. 5 of 17 outside the arc. But the bigger thing, again, was those mid-range shots, those short mid-range, mid-range shots, that those leaners Luka hits, the kind of, elbow jumpers Kyrie likes to hit. Get into their space a little bit if you're Rudy, or if you're Cat, or if you're Nas. And a lot of times it was Rudy, and make them think, make them pass out of it. And the Wolves did that in this game. And that's easy to gloss over because it doesn't show up in the same way that we want to pray. And Draymond Green wants to pray. Man, I need to not keep bringing those guys up. No more. The rest, I'm not going to bring up inside the NBA at all. I promise it's not getting to me. We can praise Kyle Anderson for the stuff that doesn't show up in the box score. That's exactly what Rudy Gobert. That's why Rudy Gobert is so good. That is why he's so good. It's the exact same reason that Kyle Anderson is so good. It's the stuff that doesn't show up in the box score. By the way, side note on the side note, Chris Mannix of SI had a tweet, I think earlier in the day on whatever day that was, Tuesday, that said, as a defensive player, something to the effect of, hey, I'm a defensive player of the year voter, is what Chris Mannix said. And he said part of his research is asking coaches who's the defender they have to prepare for the most. And overwhelmingly, people said Rudy. And then he said something to the effect of, the idea that the series is exposing him is stupid. Awesome. Like that. 100% right. And in the same way that an analyst who's not really an analyst, but a bitter player who shall not be named, is saying that Kyle Anderson deserves credit for the stuff that's on the box score, which he does. He does. Absolutely. We have to credit Rudy Gobert for the exact same thing. Just because Luka can put him on skates in an ISO, which, by the way, in game 2, it was one play after Rudy shut down Luka in an isolation situation. But we're not going to talk about that one. We're going to talk about the one where Luka scored, as he's supposed to do, as one of the top 5 players in the league against a center on the perimeter. But we ignore the stuff that Rudy does, like the way he defends in drop coverage. One of the best guys against drop coverage in Luka Doncic. He was a primary reason. I mean, Slow-Mo, Ant, who we've already talked about, those guys, absolutely. But Rudy was a big part of forcing Luka into a 7 for 21, forcing Kyrie into a 6 of 18. And let's not miss that. Let's not miss that from this game. That was huge. A couple other quick things. This game was certainly more physical. The Wolves played more physical, which was great. Rudy was tagging guys. He was tagging rollers. He was getting into people physically. Derrick Jones Jr. and him got tangled up on a play that I thought what they should have done is called an offensive foul on Derrick Jones Jr. and a technical on Derrick Jones Jr. If you wanted to call double fouls, fine. It was a weird one. And they ended up both getting technicals, but there was no offensive foul on Jones, even though there should have been. But Rudy was getting under their skin. He was getting on their nerves by just kind of tagging guys as they're rolling through the paint. And those same plays, the Wolves were called for fouls on consistently in games 1 and game 2. And it was Chris Finch yelling on the bench, like, hey, this is playoff basketball. Like, you have to allow a level of physicality. We've heard Stan Van Gundy and Reggie Miller on the call on TNT say the same thing. It was allowed to an extent in this game, but then there were stretches where all of a sudden everything was being called. And then it was like, all right, well, wait a minute. Why does Luka have 12 free throw attempts? And he ended up with 8, but there was a stretch in the middle of the game where he wasn't getting any calls. Now, the Wolves ended up attempting 4 more free throws than Dallas, but that goes back to my original point. The physicality was leveled up in this game, and that's a good thing for Minnesota. Game 3, they allowed a lot of free throw attempts, and I thought they were somewhat physical, and I thought they had an iffy whistle, but that was more, they were grabbier. They weren't just like truly physical like they had been against Denver, in games 1 and 2 of the second round series. The Wolves are genuinely physical without just being grabby and hacky and, like hoping that they don't get foul calls. But if they're physical, moving their feet, the officials aren't going to call everything. And if you're consistently moving your feet and getting to the spot and you're defending with your hands up, you may get called for a few fouls here and there, but they're not going to call everything. So Minnesota being a +4 in free throw attempts in this game was huge. Minnesota did commit one more foul than Dallas. So it's not like Dallas was getting called for a bunch more fouls than Minnesota. I thought the Wolves had a poor whistle in this game. They were on the wrong end of a lot of stuff that they shouldn't have been. The Cat stuff. We'll talk about Cat and studs and duds. I don't want to go off the rails here with that one, but the way that Luka Doncic is officiated is absolutely frustrating. Luka's an incredible player, and I love watching Luka in terms of what he's able to do on the floor. But you have to, blindfold immediately when the play's over and earmuffs. You don't want to hear or see him complain after every single play. Awesome to watch play. I just wish that it was officiated differently. I wish that maybe I don't want Ant to play like Luka. I want Ant to play like Ant. But the way the game is officiated, it's not going to turn out the same way. That's the unfortunate way with the official baiting that we have in the NBA. But it is what it is. A couple more quick things before we get to studs and duds. Big things I'll probably spend a little more time on them on Thursday's show. We'll get to those things here next. All right. Talked about free throw differential, physicality of the game, the officiating, and let's talk about points in the paint. The Timberwolves, I already talked a lot about Rudy, so I won't spend a lot of time here, but the Minnesota ended up plus 10 points in the paint. I didn't yet get the actual percentage at the rim for Dallas, but just know it was much worse in this game. They'd been shooting like 70% at the rim in the series so far. Minnesota was like around 60%, which is a big reason in a series where every game is, the first 3 games were decided by a total of 14 points, I think, 11 points, 12 points, something like that. Minnesota was a plus 10 points in the paint in this game. Rudy was a big part of that. Ant getting into the paint, getting all the way to the rim was a big part of it. Cat scoring inside early in the game was a big part of it. Rudy getting a couple of dunks was a big part of it. The interior defense to me, though, was really big. And we talked about Rudy quite a bit, but the plus 10 points in the paint and Derek Lively not playing clearly had a big impact on that. The 3 minutes or whatever at Dwight Powell was, we'll say, not impactful for Dallas. Although the 4 minutes of Dante Exum was. He hit like a couple crazy shots. Well, I guess one was an open 3. And then he hit a crazy left-handed bank shot. I don't know. Thankfully, he only played those 4 minutes. I wasn't ready for Dante Exum to close the Wolves out in game 4. That wasn't something I was prepared for on my Tuesday night. Anyway, points of the paint were big for Minnesota and obviously much improved in that category. An area where they were almost in big trouble. They were only a -1 in turnovers. They committed 15 turnovers to Dallas's 14. But somehow Dallas had twice as many points off turnovers as Minnesota. It's almost a complete statistical anomaly that teams could be 1 turnover apart, but Dallas scored twice as many points off turnovers. And at the same time, Dallas was only a +1 fast break points. According to the ESPN box score, Minnesota was lost fast break points 14-13, but they lost points off turnovers 30-15. Part of that was the live ball turnovers, yes, but the efficiency of Dallas's offense in some of these moments versus Minnesota's defense. I thought the transition defense as the game wore on got better. It was a much bigger problem early. In fact, I'm pretty sure basically all of those points off turnovers were in the first 2.5 quarters of the game. I think Minnesota, of their 15 turnovers, 9 or 10 of them were in the first half. And most of the rest of them were early in the third quarter. So the turnover stuff is still a big deal, but it's these silly outlier stats. The points off turnovers, 30 points off of 15 Minnesota turnovers, an average of 2 points per possession is absolute insanity. And then the Wolves losing game 1 with this outlier 3-point, or this outlier performance where you destroy them in 3-point shooting, but you lose the game. Just a lot of weird things going against the Wolves so far in this series. And as I said, as I started the show with today, Minnesota has not played well yet. And if they can get a little bit of that luck swinging the other way and play a little bit better, like this thing going 7 is not crazy. And obviously then that becomes a coin flip with maybe a slight advantage momentum-wise and home court-wise to Minnesota. But man, it's been another weird series. All right, let's do studs and duds. I haven't talked a whole lot about the individual performances of Ant and Cat. Let's start with Cat because this one, it's something, this performance. 25 points on 9 of 13, 4 of 5 on threes, 3 of 3 at the line. He only had 5 rebounds, but he also only played 30 minutes because, I don't know if you heard, he was in some foul trouble in this game. And his first 2 fouls were both silly. I believe his first one was a hack at midcourt for no reason. He just hacks Luka, and it was a foul. And then the offensive foul, which was the rare, like, getting called for an offensive foul with shoulder contact where the defender doesn't fall over. Technically, it was the correct call. But this is another example of, and I mean this, I will go to my grave talking about the self-fulfilling prophecy and the vicious cycle that is the Karl-Anthony Towns foul trouble thing. Because show me another NBA player that call has been called on, that I forget who the defender even was. It might have been Gafford. But Cat drops his shoulder into the defender and then goes up to attempt a shot. The defender doesn't fall over. He gives ground, and they call the foul on Cat. Again, letter of the law. And it's one of my pet peeves is that guys, usually taking a charge, you're not actually in a real, true legal guardian position. You're just trying to draw a charge. And secondly, you shouldn't have to fall over to draw a charge. So this was actually the correct call, but we just never see it called anywhere else. It just drives me nuts. And it's because the officials are looking for it from Karl-Anthony Towns, because the opposing team reminds them surely before every game, hey, remember, Cat likes to hook. Cat likes to do this. Cat does that. And the refs know it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy in that sense. And Cat's also expecting to get called for it, but yet he can't help himself. So those are both fouls. They were whatever. There were a couple cheap ones mixed in there. And then, of course, there was the fifth foul, which was the elbow to the jaw, which, again, is obviously a foul, but it's a ridiculous foul and one that, like, only would happen to Cat. And then the sixth foul when he fouls out, which is the borderline, like, I retweeted the John Hollinger tweet about how, that the lean into the defender who's stopped his forward progress is not supposed to be a foul call anymore, a shooting foul. And I think Cat was close in Luka's space. It's really 50-50, but to call that there and foul Cat out on that for Scott Foster is a real rough one. All that to say, Cat was bad when it came to fouling in this game. Shooting-wise, the efficiency was good. I actually thought he wasn't as good defensively as he had been in the first 3 games of this series. And I thought he could have been a little more active on the glass. I thought decision-making, he was a little frenetic offensively, as evidenced by the 2 offensive fouls, or actually 3, because he had one on a rebound too, where he went over the back of somebody. So again, it all ties back to the foul trouble, because the frenetic, stray voltage stuff we talk about with Cat was there again. But the shooting efficiency was great. And he did start inside and made some shots inside. He got to the line a little bit. He shot a technical free throw on a defensive 3 seconds, which probably helped with the rhythm. Actually, I think he shot 2 of them. And he also had an and one on a baseline drive against, I think it was Derrick Jones Jr. when he had an and one. Just a good efficiency night for Cat. And he was one of the Wolves studs. He did have 4 turnovers. He did commit 6 fouls. 3 of those turnovers were offensive fouls. He's got to find a bit more of that balance in game 5. The Wolves are going to win and force game 6 back in Dallas. But this was a good Cat performance. And clearly, if it's not for Cat hitting those shots, and especially that last deep quarter, that last just below the break, three-pointer he hit, contested 3, that put the Wolves up like 6 with under 4 to play. I mean, the Wolves, their season's over. Cat was the reason down the stretch for this win. My second stud is Mike Conley. Conley was fantastic. 14 points on 5 of 9. He was only 1 of 4 on threes. But he was had a couple of real tough straight line drives to the basket, made layups like he was a much younger man. 7 assists, 0 turnovers in this game for Mike, plus 4 steals, a couple big ones in there. I thought he was great and deserves some credit for that. My third one, I'm back and forth on Ant and Kyle Anderson, and I know that's crazy. Ant had a near triple-double, but some of the turnovers were brutal. The free throw shooting, some of the shot selection. He hit big shots down the stretch. I have to give it to Kyle Anderson, though. I mean, slow-mo, as much as I've ripped on him this season, and for good reason, he was great. And the box score line, the 4 assists, 3 steals is great. He only had 2 points on 1 of 3 shooting. He had 4 assists, 3 steals, 4 rebounds in 25 minutes, 3 offensive rebounds, keeping possessions alive for Minnesota. He was good defensively, was great on Luka. He was invaluable. He was the 6th man in this game for Minnesota. He was minute-wise. He was 6th on the team in minutes. What a reversal from barely being in the rotation at times against Denver. It's obviously a completely different matchup, but I thought he was great. Back to Ant. Ant was good overall. 29 points on 25 shots. Not a dud or anything, obviously. I mean, there were great moments. 10 rebounds for Ant, 9 assists. He did have the 6 turnovers. Had a couple big defensive plays late, but also had some blow-bys that he just whiffed on. like end of the third quarter. He just got beat off the dribble by Jaden Hardy, came down and made a shot on the other end. But before that, he got beat off the dribble, straight line drive by Jaden Hardy. Luka did it a couple of times. So, take the good with the bad and also hit those big shots at the end of the game, the big bank shot, the up and under double pivot move that he had, in the paint shortly before the bank shot. Then he hit that deep 2 on the right side of the floor. That was basically the dagger, prior to the Luka almost 4-point play. But Ant was really good, obviously. No duds for Minnesota in this game. I thought Jaden was good defensively, was quiet offensively, but hit a couple of big threes. Rudy was fine. We talked about Rudy already. Nas was quiet, but fine. Hit that big layup at the end of the game and to pretty much seal it. And Nickeil hit a couple of threes. Great to see Nickeil Alexander-Walker. He only played 13 minutes. The least minutes he's played in a game in the playoffs thus far. But good minutes still from Nickeil. All right. We're going to have lots to talk about on Thursday. What to watch, what other adjustments could be made, what could the Wolves do to continue some success offensively? How could Cat stay more involved, keep him on what's hopefully the start of a heater for Karl-Anthony Towns Target Center? It's going to be hopping Thursday night. We'll talk about all that on Thursday's show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.